The air was thick with dust and desperation. Stagecoach auctions were never quiet places, but today the crowd pressed closer, murmuring like wolves circling prey. The clatter of boots against wooden planks echoed as men shouted bids for horses, rifles, and cattle. But the murmurs hushed when the auctioneer raised his hand and announced the next item. Not a wagon, not a saddle, but a woman. Clara Wynn stood stiffly beneath the sweltering sun, her wrists bound loosely with rope that bit into her skin. She kept her chin high, but inside her chest her heart pounded like a runaway train. Every eye on her was sharp and calculating, as though she were a tool, not a person. She wanted to scream, but silence had been beaten into her long before this day. And so she waited, her fate balanced on the twitch of a stranger's hand. The auctioneer's voice cracked across the stage. A strong young woman, fit for work, fit for loyalty. Who'll start the bidding? The crowd stirred. A man in a wide-brimmed hat spat tobacco into the dirt and raised his hand. Another called out a number higher. The bids climbed like vultures, swirling higher into the sky, each one pulling Clara's hope further away. She felt her breath quicken, but forced herself to stand straight, refusing to look broken. And then something shifted. From the back of the crowd, a tall figure stepped forward. Elias Hawthorne. His presence was quiet but carried the weight of command, the kind that made men lower their voices without being asked. His ranch was known across the valley, his herds vast, his reputation steady. But unlike the others, his gaze wasn't hungry. It wasn't cruel. It was steady, sharp, almost protective. Clara felt his eyes lock on hers, and for a single heartbeat, she forgot to breathe. The auctioneer grinned wide. Ah, the rancher joins the bidding. Voices whispered, some in awe, some in envy. Elias's bid silenced the others. No one dared outmatch him, not when his very name was a kind of currency. With a final slam of the gavel, the auctioneer declared, "Sold to Elias Hawthorne." A wave of noise rushed over Clara. Cheers, grumbles, curses. She braced herself as a worker came forward with a heavy iron shackle, ready to clamp it on her wrist. The cold chain glinted in the sunlight. For the first time, Clara's resolve cracked. The thought of another life spent in bondage nearly buckled her knees. But Elias lifted his hand. "Stop!" His voice wasn't loud, but it cut sharper than a whip. The worker froze. Slowly, Elias stepped onto the platform, the wooden boards creaking under his boots. The crowd watched, breath held. Clara stared as Elias reached out. Not with a chain, not with a lock, but with his bare hand, open and steady. For a moment, her mind spun in disbelief. No man had ever offered her freedom, not here, not like this. His palm waited, a silent choice. Her breath shook as she looked from the rope on her wrist to his hand. Every instinct told her to fear, to distrust, to run. But something deeper, something that had been starved but never killed, whispered that maybe, just maybe, she had been bought not as property, but as a person. The crowd erupted, some laughing, some cursing his defiance. "Ain't how it's done," one shouted. Another spat. "You'll regret that, Hawthorne." But Elias didn't flinch. His hand remained steady, eyes locked on Clara's. With trembling fingers, Clara reached out. The rope fell away, and her palm touched his. Warmth rushed in her chest, a shock after years of cold iron. In that instant, the chain was broken, if not in law, then in spirit. But as the two stepped off the platform together, Clara felt the burn of unseen eyes boring into her back. Hatred, envy, and vengeance hung heavy in the air. Somewhere in the crowd, a figure watched too intently, lips curling into a promise of retribution. Freedom had begun, but danger had not ended. The wagon rolled across the dry plain, its wheels groaning as if carrying the weight of more than wood and steel. Clara sat, stiffly in the back, her wrists finally free of rope, yet she held them together as if shackles still clung. The prairie wind tugged strands of her hair loose, but she barely noticed. Every rattle of the wagon reminded her of a truth she could not escape. She had been bought. And no matter how gently Elias Hawthorne had offered his hand, she couldn't yet believe kindness came without a price. Elias rode alongside, reins loose in his grip. He didn't stare at her like the men at the auction had. His eyes were on the horizon, calm but watchful, as though he carried responsibility heavier than the herds grazing in his pastures. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, even. "You'll have work at the ranch, but not the kind you fear. You'll eat at my table, not in the dirt." Clara flinched at his words. Promises were dangerous things. She had seen too many crumble. Still, a part of her wanted to believe him. "Why?" she asked before she could stop herself. The single word cracked the silence like lightning. Elias didn't answer right away. His gaze lingered on the horizon, on the jagged ridge where the sun was burning down into shadow. At last he said, "Because no one should live in chains. Not if I can help it." His words struck deeper than any shackle ever had. But Clara's mistrust, built brick by brick from years of betrayal, wouldn't topple so easily. She turned away, pretending to study the landscape. The rolling hills stretched wide and endless, freedom painted in earth and sky. But freedom was a cruel thing to glimpse if it wasn't real. When they arrived at the ranch, the scent of horses and fresh hay greeted her. The farmhouse stood tall, weatherwood gleaming in the sunset. She expected cold glares, harsh commands, the same cruelty dressed in new clothing. Instead, a woman stepped onto the porch, broad-shouldered, gray-haired, with sharp eyes softened by age. "Miriam Holt, another mouth to feed?" Miriam asked, arms folded. Her voice carried no malice, only practicality. "Another set of hands," Elias replied. Clara lowered her eyes, bracing for rejection. But Miriam only nodded once and turned toward the kitchen. "Then she'll earn her place. Supper's near ready." It was such a simple welcome, yet it cracked something inside Clara. Still, as she followed into the farmhouse, her nerves prickled. At the auction, she had felt chains cut from her wrists. But here in this strange house, she wondered if invisible chains still waited, softer but no less binding. Dinner was quiet at first. Elias spoke little. Miriam busied herself with serving, and Clara watched every movement like a cornered animal testing for traps. Yet nothing came. No mocking words, no harsh commands. Just food, warm and filling, passed across the table. For the first time in years, Clara ate until her stomach no longer ached. She almost felt human again. Almost. But as the night deepened and shadows pressed against the windows, Clara couldn't silence the fear coiling in her chest. The world outside this ranch was not done with her. Somewhere beyond the fence lines, men like Jedediah Crow still roamed. Men who believed she was theirs to break. She set her fork down, appetite gone. Freedom in one house didn't erase chains in the world beyond. And she knew, sooner or later, those chains would come clawing back. Clara woke with the dawn, the prairie sky painted in strokes of rose and gold. The farmhouse was still, except for the distant rumble of hooves in the pasture. She pulled on the plain dress Miriam had left folded at the foot of her bed. Clean, modest, smelling faintly of soap instead of sweat and dust. It was such a small mercy, yet it felt strange against her skin, like she had stepped into someone else's life. Outside, Elias was already working. He moved with quiet purpose, guiding horses into the corral, his voice low and steady. The animals obeyed him not out of fear, but out of trust. Clara watched from the porch, uneasy, a man commanding without cruelty. That was something she did not yet know how to believe. Miriam bustled into the kitchen, snapping Clara from her thoughts. "Standing won't make breakfast," the older woman said briskly. Clara startled, but Miriam's tone was not sharp, only firm. "If you're to live here, you'll learn the rhythm of this house. Everyone carries their share." Clara nodded, eager to prove she was worth the roof over her head. She chopped onions, fetched water, set the table. Small tasks, but tasks done with trembling hands. Each time Miriam glanced her way, Clara braced for a lash of criticism. Instead, Miriam simply corrected her grip on a knife or showed her how to knead dough with more strength. It was the kind of teaching Clara had never known, stern but not cruel, guiding without breaking. By midday, Clara stood in the barn beside Elias. The heat pressed heavy, dust clinging to her skin. Elias handed her a brush. "Help me with the mare," he said. His tone was even, neither command nor request. Clara hesitated. She had seen horses bite, kick, rear. The mare snorted, stamping a hoof. Fear crawled up Clara's throat. Elias watched her carefully, then stepped closer, resting a steady hand on the horse's neck. "She can feel your fear," he murmured. "Don't give it to her. Give her calm." Something in his voice anchored her. Slowly, Clara raised the brush. The mare's hide was warm beneath her hand, each stroke loosening tension she hadn't realized she carried. For a moment, Clara felt the wild steadiness of the animal seep into her bones. She exhaled, almost smiling, but peace was fragile. That night, when the house grew quiet, Clara sat awake by the window. The stars spread endless above her, yet freedom felt no closer. Every kindness from Elias or Miriam twisted inside her chest, warring with suspicion. Why were they treating her like a person when all her life she'd been treated as less? Her mind turned to Jedediah Crow, the man whose shadow had followed her to the auction block. His voice haunted her memory, rough and possessive. "You belong to me." She shivered, wrapping her arms tight around herself. The floor creaked. Elias's voice broke the silence from the doorway. "You're not his anymore." His silhouette stood against the lamplight, calm but unyielding. "No one owns you here, Clara." She wanted to believe him more than anything, but belief was dangerous. She swallowed hard, her voice a whisper. "And when will he comes for me?" Elias's eyes didn't waver. "Then he'll find he's not the only one with a claim." The words hung heavy between them. Clara's breath caught. A promise or a warning? She couldn't tell. All she knew was that her life, once written in chains, was being rewritten line by fragile line. And somewhere beyond the ranch's fences, the ink of her past was already stirring to stain it again. The prairie carried secrets in its silence. For weeks, Clara found a rhythm at the ranch. Mornings filled with the creak of saddles and the smell of fresh bread. Afternoons spent tending gardens or brushing down horses. Evenings by the hearth where Miriam's sharp tongue softened into quiet stories. Little by little, Clara's edges began to smooth. Her hand steadied. Her eyes lifted. Hope, once buried deep, began to stir like a seed pressing through hard earth. But peace never lingers long in a land carved by greed. Word traveled across the valley, whispered by drifters and barkeeps. Jedediah Crow was looking for what he claimed was his. Men had seen him in the saloons, his smile thin as a knife, buying rounds with coin earned from broken lives. "The girl ain't free," he spat to anyone who'd listen. "She was stolen. I'll take her back, one way or another." At the ranch, Clara felt the shift before she heard the rumors. Elias grew quieter, watching the fence lines longer than before. The ranch hands, two men loyal to him, Caleb and Rourke, checked rifles when they thought no one was looking. Even Miriam's laughter dulled, her eyes darting toward the horizon whenever. The dogs barked. One evening, Clara carried water to the barn and found Elias saddling his horse under the lantern light. "Riders have been spotted near the ridge," he said when she asked. His voice was calm, but a muscle flickered in his jaw. "Crow's men, most likely. Testing our land." Fear gripped her chest like iron. "He'll come for me." The words slipped out before she could catch them. Elias stopped, his hand still on the saddle strap. Slowly, he turned to her. "He may come, but he won't take you." The certainty in his voice was like stone, but stone could crack. Clara wanted to believe him, yet the memory of Crow's hands on her arm, dragging her across dusty ground, was too strong to banish. She pressed her palms against the wooden stall, trying to steady her breath. A storm gathered that night, not in the sky, but in Clara's chest. Could she risk believing in safety, in freedom, when shadows hunted her from every corner? And worse, could she risk believing in Elias, when the cost of trust might be her heart shattered all over again? 2 days later, the storm came to the ranch. Clara was in the field when the riders appeared. 5 men, dust rising in their wake, led by Jedediah Crow himself. His black coat flapped in the wind, his hat shadowing a smile, too sharp to be anything but cruel. The ranch dogs barked wild, and Miriam rushed Clara inside. But through the window, Clara saw him, saw how his eyes locked on the farmhouse with a hunger that made her blood run cold. "Elias." Crow's voice rang across the yard, slick as oil. "You've got something of mine. Best hand it over before trouble gets worse." Elias stepped onto the porch, rifle resting easy in his grip. His tone was steady, but each word struck like steel. "She's not yours, Crow. She never was." Laughter spilled from Crow's lips, echoing like a threat across the open land. "We'll see about that." The men reined back their horses, retreating into the distance, dust trailing behind them like smoke. But Clara knew it wasn't over. That retreat was not surrender. It was a promise of war. And as the sun sank behind the horizon, painting the ranch in blood-red light, Clara's heart whispered a chilling truth. The past was no longer shadow. It was here, and it was coming for her. The ranch no longer breathed with ease. Days once filled with quiet work now throbbed with tension, every sound magnified. The snap of a twig, the creak of a gate, the bark of dogs in the night. Clara carried the weight of it like a stone in her chest. Each time she looked at Elias, she saw the calm mask he wore, but beneath it flickered the same unease that haunted her. Jedediah Crow was circling, and sooner or later, he would strike. It was Silas Boone who arrived first. A drifter with quick eyes and a tongue smooth as polished silver, Silas rode in one morning claiming he was looking for work. His horse was lean, his boots worn, but his smile carried too much ease for a man without a home. Elias eyed him cautiously, yet something in Silas's manner earned him a trial. Clara, however, felt her skin prickle each time he passed. He was too curious about her, too quick to ask questions with a grin that never reached his eyes. Miriam muttered over the stove, "Fox in the henhouse, that one." Clara wanted to believe the older woman's suspicion was only habit, but dread told her otherwise. 2 nights later, her fears proved true. The air was heavy, moonlight spilling silver across the fields when the dogs began to howl. Clara jolted awake, heart hammering. Outside, lanterns flickered. The ranch hands were already running. From the window, she saw them, Crow's men, torches in hand, setting fire to the outer fence. Flames climbed fast, smoke clawing at the sky. Elias grabbed his rifle, his voice sharp but steady. "Stay inside." But Clara's instinct screamed that walls wouldn't protect her. Not from Crow, not from the chains he carried in his mind. Then came the betrayal. Silas, the drifter, stepped from the shadows, pistol aimed not at Crow's men, but at Elias himself. "Should have paid me better," he sneered. The truth struck Clara like a whip. Silas had never been a ranch hand. He'd been Crow's eyes inside the house all along. Chaos erupted. Shots cracked in the night. Horses screamed. The fire spread like a living beast devouring wood and grass. Clara ducked behind the doorframe, terror slicing through her. But in the chaos, she saw Elias locked in a struggle with Silas. Crow's men shouted, embers falling around them like burning rain. In that moment, Clara felt the old fear claw at her, whispering that she was nothing but a possession to be dragged back into chains. But beneath the fear, something else burned hotter, a spark of defiance, a fury against the years of silence forced upon her. She would not go back. Not tonight. Not ever. She seized a lantern from the table and hurled it across the porch where Silas and Elias fought. Glass shattered, fire spilling between them. Silas cursed, stumbling back, giving Elias the opening to knock him hard into the dirt. For the first time, Clara's hands had struck against her own chains, and the fire in her chest roared brighter than the flames consuming the ranch fence. But the night wasn't over. Beyond the smoke, Clara saw Jedediah Crow himself watching from horseback, his face lit by firelight. His smile was thin, triumphant, as though every scream, every flame, every bullet was part of a plan he'd already written. The battle had not ended. It had only begun. The fire painted the night in gold and scarlet, smoke curling like a serpent across the ranch. Clara's chest burned with every breath as she stumbled through the haze, her ears ringing from the crack of gunfire. Behind her, Miriam shouted orders to save what livestock they could, while Elias stood at the front of the chaos, rifle steady, eyes locked on the man who had haunted Clara's nightmares for years, Jedediah Crow. Crow dismounted slowly, boots crunching over the dirt, his smile curling like smoke. You've dressed her up in freedom, Hawthorne, but she'll never be more than what I made her. Chains can be hidden, but they don't break. His voice slithered through the firelight, every word aimed at Clara. Her knees weakened, but Elias's voice cut through the fear. You never made her, and you won't take her. The two men faced each other, firelight flickering across sweat and steel. For a moment, silence stretched, the world holding its breath. Then Crow lunged, pistol drawn. The crack of the shot split the night, echoing across the valley. Clara's scream caught in her throat as Elias staggered back, his shoulder torn red. Pain twisted his face, yet he stood tall, refusing to fall. Fury surged in Clara like a wave breaking stone. She would not watch her freedom, her fragile, precious freedom, be stolen again. Snatching the fallen rifle from the dirt, she raised it with trembling hands. Crow's eyes widened, not in fear, but in cruel amusement. You, he sneered. You'll never pull that trigger. You're still mine. Her hand shook. Memories clawed at her. The crack of a whip, the cold bite of shackles, the endless nights of silence. But then Elias's voice, hoarse yet steady, reached her through the fire. You're not his, Clara. Not anymore. Not ever. The world narrowed to a single breath. Clara squeezed the trigger. The shot roared, and Jedediah Crow staggered. Shot carved into his face as the firelight swallowed him. He fell hard into the dirt, and for the first time, his voice was silent. Clara dropped the rifle, her body shaking as though the chains had only now fallen. Tears blurred her vision, but Elias was there, bloodied yet unbroken, his hand reaching for hers. That same hand that had first saved her from the auction block, steady, open, refusing to chain. She grasped it tight, grounding herself in the warmth of something she had never truly known. Choice. The ranch burned through the night, but when dawn broke, the fire was ash, and with it, the hold of her past. Miriam, weary but unbowed, set about rebuilding. Caleb and Rourke stood guard, their loyalty stronger than ever. And Elias, his arm bound in cloth, stood beside Clara at the edge of the field, watching the sun rise over land scarred but still standing. Clara breathed deep, the air raw and new in her lungs. She had been sold, chained, hunted, betrayed. But here, with the smoke fading and Elias's hand in hers, she was something Crow could never comprehend.